Okay, so we ended yesterday looking at the consequences of not having or not investing in any kind of army or protection. The idea that the individual city-states were governed differently and didn't allow for a large army to be created to defend all of that Italian peninsula. And Spain and France comes in. They fight over all of that territory, with ultimately Spain being the dominant force. So as a result of this, there's going to be people to look around and write fairly awesome books about important books about this topic. And this will be our friend Machiavelli. Can everybody see that? Or do I need to turn the backlights off? Can we see that? We don't get much sunshine this time of the year, so Machiavelli writes this book called The Prince, and this is it. You could go into any large bookstore in any major town and find this book, which was written in, I think it's 1493, but let me check. Written by Machiavelli. I always forget when it was originally written. 475 years ago. It is still, I would even bet if we went in our Terre Haute Books a Million, that we would find this book there. It is the most influential work on political power in the Western world. Any of you thinking about majoring in political science or going into any kind of history field, you will definitely have to read this book. It's short, and it's very succinct in what the book is about. It's, how do I get political power? And more importantly, how do I hold on to it? Machiavelli looks at the state of what is happening on that Italian peninsula, that there is no one that is in charge. And because no one is in charge, we've been invaded by this other country. And what he says is essentially what governments and political leaders have used since this time period to conduct business. The current belief is that princes, and when we use the word prince, that means any kind of ruler, should be ethical and follow Christian principles. And I'm sure most of us would agree, what a wonderful world this would be, according to Louis Armstrong, if the people that lead us followed that ideal, that they were ethical and followed Christian principles. Anybody know any leaders that actually do that? If you do, tell me who they are, because I would like to know, because most of our leaders are not across the world. There are very few that could fall into this idea of being ethical and following Christian principles. What Machiavelli says is a prince should learn and understand human nature. And in understanding human nature, you know that human nature is self-interested. We do things because it's in the best interest of us. So those of you that have parents with strict rules, you don't follow those rules because, maybe you do, but let's just pretend. You don't follow those rules because they're fun. You don't follow those rules because that's what you want to do. You follow those rules because if you don't, something will happen to you. And that's what Machiavelli says. That's what human nature is. And the only reason that people follow those rules are because they're afraid of what would happen to them if they don't. So a prince shouldn't act on moral principles, but on the behalf of what's in the best interest of the state. What is in the best interest of the country? And Machiavelli will be the first among these groups to abandon morality as a basis for analyzing political activity. And what he's going to say, and what we're going to look at in our assignment with Machiavelli today, what he essentially says, is it better to be loved or feared as a ruler? And he says feared. The only way you can rule is with fear. If you rule with love, they're going to take advantage of you. If you rule with fear, people will do what you ask them to. And again, most all of you know, if your parent rules with fear or love, mine was fear. Like, I did not break curfew because I knew what was going to happen if I didn't, or if I did break curfew. My parents, if they put me on restriction, and I don't know what you guys call it, but my dad was a military dad, so we were restricted to quarters. So if I was on restriction for 2 weeks and they said 2 weeks, it was 2 weeks. I could never be the annoying kid that would get, because that was not anything what would happen in my house. And that's what Machiavelli says, that you should not rule based on anything but what's in the best interest of the state. And if you've ever heard the ends justify the means, which is a very common phrase, we get that from Machiavelli. He said, if the end is achieved, it doesn't matter how you got there, as long as you got there. That's very ruthless. It's sometimes very callous. But Machiavelli says if the end game is what you need, however you get there is in the best interest of the state. So that, again, is Machiavelli. He is a really important person in political history, in the history of Europe as well. So we're going to change gears, but we are going to come back to this as part of our assignment for today and tomorrow. So Renaissance society is divided into 3 classes. So if you remember way back when we started looking at all the characteristics of a civilization, that we had those great big long list of who was where. Now we're just down to 3. You are either a noble, which in that noble we will also add church. You either live in a town or you're a peasant. And that's pretty much it. You fit into one of those 3 categories. And these 3 estates, or these 3 classes, again, will be what makes up Renaissance society. Our first book of Noble, or our first look at nobles, begins to define things that they must do. So to be a noble, there are things that you must do. And in order to make sure all these nobles know that, we write a book. It's called The Book of the Courtier by Cagliostro. And he has this big giant list of all these things that nobles must be. It's pretty extensive. It's pretty long. Talent, character, and grace. And this is, when we talk about nobles and we talk about this list, it is for men. It is not a list for noble women. This is all about men. So you have to have talent. You have to have grace. You have to have character. You must perform military and physical exercises. You must have a classical education. And that classical education means the Latin for Rome, and learning the Greek language to read the classics written by our Greek historians. Enrich your life with art. So that, again, is where all that patronage of the Renaissance artists come in. I got to buy that. Follow a standard of conduct. And most importantly, serve his prince honestly. You can see that a lot of these probably are some holdovers from our knights that we talked about in our Middle Ages. There's some added ones, of course, about grace and character and classical education. But this is really the beginnings of trying to distinguish classes of people and create this big separation between each one. Townspeople. And when we divide the townspeople into 3 classes, hopefully you remember that word patricians. That was from our Roman time period. And those were the people that had wealth. So patricians gained wealth from trade, banking, and industry. Burghers, shopkeepers, artists, and guild members. So patricians worked with industry, right? They didn't do things with their hands. Burghers do things with their hands. They make things, and workers are the very low people and lived in extreme poverty. These wage-earning workers had no skills, and they didn't really necessarily have jobs. They just went from place to place hoping to earn a living. They lived in extreme poverty. And then finally is our peasants. They make up 85 to 90% of the total European population. And again, our whole body of work in this course is trying to understand how 85 to 90% of the population has no authority, no rights, no economic. Think about the idea of 95% of the economy being controlled by one group. They, again, have little to no economic clout, except in highly urban areas. Serfdom is going to decrease, and eventually more peasants are going to become legally free as a result of some political changes. Okay, and those two questions, make sure you know those. How are the cities? Do I have that in your notes? Yeah. So I'm leaving. So hopefully you see a progression, because I'm trying to move you into thinking about test questions. So the last few chapters, I would have answered this for you, right? That last slide. Now you've got to start thinking about that and answering those for yourself as far as getting ready for test. How are the city-states governed? That's our three. Make sure you know Milan, Venice, and Florence. Social classes, and then why did the Renaissance start in Italy, and what city-states were most influential? Okay, so that takes us through that section of notes, and we are going to just pay attention up here while I get to our, well, you can't see up here. Hold on a minute. While I get to our assignment that we're going to look at for the next 2 days. Okay, we are looking at Machiavelli, loved or feared. Okay, so Machiavelli wrote in his book, The Prince, it's better for a prince, king, ruler to be feared rather than loved, and compiled very strong reasons as to why he believed this way. So what do you think? Is it better for a ruler to be feared or loved? Obviously, in a modern world, leaders need to convey, I don't know why I'm reading it, need to convey both of these qualities to govern rule effectively, right? So if we were really going to think about the qualities of a ruler, your parents hopefully would be that same thing. As much as I talk about how strict my parents were, they loved me and took care of me. So they were a ruler that did both. They were loved and feared. I'm not giving you that option, right? The option is off the table for them to be both. This is what makes sometimes these arguments hard. You got to pick one side, stay on one side. So in this assignment, you must be, as Machiavelli writes, one or the other, loved or feared. You must decide what would be in the best interest of a country to have a leader that is loved or feared. 2 paragraphs. Your first paragraph is your choice and your reasons for supporting your choice. You are not graded on which one you pick. It doesn't matter to me if you pick one, if you say you think a ruler should be loved or a ruler should be feared. What you're graded on is the support you give for why you think that that's the way a leader should rule. And then your second, it shouldn't be your second choice. Your second paragraph would be what this country would look like, how the citizens would feel about their leader, how would the nation function with a leader governing as either feared or ruled. And again, you can't be wishy-washy. Pick one and discuss only that one. So if you pick that you think that a leader should be feared, you should not talk about at any point in these 2 paragraphs what it would be like, though, if somebody was loved, right? You're picking one side, staying on that side. This is, again, a persuasive paper. You're trying to persuade me to think like you. And I think I've used this example before. If you're trying to persuade your parents to let you stay out later, and you give them all the good reasons why you should be able to stay out later. I'm always where I say that I will be. If you text or call, I always answer within an appropriate amount of time. You know all my friends. But I do know after midnight, more girls are sexually assaulted. There are more accidents, car accidents, but still, please let me stay outside. Let me stay out late, right? You don't do that. You stop at just the ideas and the facts that support what you want the reader to think. You do not have to, and the word is refute, you do not have to refute the other side. So this is not an argument paper, it's a persuasive paper. You're trying to persuade me to think like you think. Have you guys done persuasive papers in English? Okay, so you know. English, I think, is a little more wishy-washy. It allows you to talk about the other side. For this one, you don't need to discuss the other option. You just tell me it's best for the ruler to be this is why, and this is what it would look like. All right, we have 2 days to work on this in class. I am not giving you another assignment or doing notes tomorrow. So use your time wisely, my friends. Use your time wisely. Anybody want to read the prints? Yep, sign out, take the pass, honey.
Yes. I could not do that. Just look at the one that you read 7.